let's talk about the New York Jets training camp in session. Yes, Nick, real football training camp is now in session. There are cleats in the grass. There are balls on the field. Guys are actually taking reps at practice. This is very, very exciting stuff. And we have a already story about a good relationship that is budding in the New York Jets organization. I think Jets fans are going to be really excited about this, showing that they have made some smart moves and they're really starting to pay off.
Yeah, minus, of course, the Jets adding Aaron Rodgers, making a lot of big moves this offseason. The question was going to be, how is it going to gel on the field? How is it going to work out once they actually lined up in a serious situation? Training camp is a serious situation. So far, so good. Based on the report you found, exciting stuff from the Jets. But before we get into that news, Jets fans got an interesting question for you guys to answer in the comment section below. Who is the fastest New York Jet in team history? A lot of interesting names. Really curious what you have to say, though. So make sure you put in the comment section below the fastest Jet in team history. But all right, Miles, what you got? What's this latest update out of training camp?
Yeah, Nick, you talked about Aaron Rodgers' addition to this team. It seems like it has the potential to be huge. And I think that sometimes we see these quarterback additions start out a little bit slow. We think Tom Brady in Tampa starts out slow, but finished hot. They won the Super Bowl that year. Russell Wilson, in addition to the Broncos, not quite as good as the Brady one, but who knows what's going to happen this year. It did start out slow, but the Rodgers one, it seems to not have started out slow because he has way more weapons than these guys did at first glance. And there's one in particular, a true New York Jet, who's not a guy that came up from the Packers, really starting to show out, and that is none other than second-year player Garrett Wilson. But, Nick, let's get into the article here. This is a really good one over from USA Today. It says, one player that Rodgers is quickly building a rapport with is wide receiver and 2022 Offensive Rookie of the Year, Garrett Wilson. Rodgers even went as far as to say Wilson reminds him of his former teammate who dons number 17. Rodgers said, "Look, I love Davante Adams. I saw him this summer," Rodgers told the media. "Davante is in the category by himself still. But that 17 reminds me of the other 17 as far as his ability to get in and out of his breaks, his quick twitch at the line of scrimmage for sure. As for Wilson, it's going to take some time for him to get used to catching passes from a future Hall of Fame quarterback, but it's an adjustment he is excited about." Wilson said that boy's cold when referring to Aaron Rodgers. He says every time he puts it on the money, it's a little surreal to have him throwing the ball. It hasn't sunk in all the way yet, but it will. So, Nick, very interesting quotes from so diverse players. Rodgers comparing Wilson to former teammate and probably best receiver in the NFL last season, Davante Adams. So those very high praise from Rodgers, who's seen it all. He's had a lot of great receivers to throw to, and he puts Wilson up there with those guys as well. And Wilson, not quite used to having a Hall of Famer who can put it on the money every single time. You know, this guy has gone out and won a Super Bowl, so having this level of talent for Wilson feels really, really nice. I think this is showing that there's a budding relationship on the Jets. This is going to be very important moving forward. But, Nick, I'm excited. What are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers' addition and Garrett Wilson and their budding relationship on the Jets?
Yeah, so this really jumped out at me when I saw this from the training camp reports. Because, look, we know Aaron Rodgers, he has some very interesting opinions at times. I'll put it like that. But he seems to be an honest guy. He calls it how he personally sees it. I don't think he's a deceitful person necessarily. He just kind of, he basically says, this is my opinion. You kind of live with it, right? Right, wrong, however you feel about it. And the fact of the matter is, Aaron Rodgers was really a big fan, obviously, of Davante Adams. They had a great relationship together, great rapport, produced a lot of wonderful things. Davante Adams grew into it, like you said, the NFL's best receiver with Aaron Rodgers. The fact that Rodgers, without playing one regular season game with Garrett Wilson yet, I mean, they've just been at a few OTAs, a few mini camp practices, and now a few training camp practices. The fact that Rodgers is like, listen, this guy is on Davante Adams' level, that is an incredible compliment. Because guess what? Rodgers doesn't just throw that around, right? That's not something Rodgers talks about all the time. He's not talking about, every other receiver he's been with as, oh, he's a Hall of Famer, he's an all-time great. To give that comparison at this point, I think he actually means it. I think he says, look, this Garrett Wilson kid, it could be and maybe already is as good as Davante Adams. And if that's the case, look out, because that was the one question mark with the New York Jets adding Aaron Rodgers, because we knew Garrett Wilson was a good player. We knew they had a good roster, but the question was, how much was the quarterback position holding them back last year, right? Because it's like, we were like, well, if they weren't the dumpster fire like they were at times last year at quarterback, they probably would have made the playoffs. But how good are these skill position guys really? Because they didn't play with any good quarterbacks. It looks like nice. They may be elite. If Garrett Wilson is close to Devontae Adams, this isn't just a good roster. This isn't just a playoff roster. This is a championship roster. And I think right now what we're seeing from Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson is a great sign of things to come for the New York Jets.
Yeah, Nick, I think it's truly crucial here. We talk about Garrett Wilson jokingly saying, "Oh, I'm not used to someone putting it on the money every time." But this is a guy, like we said, offensive rookie of the year last year. I think he put up 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns. If he can get hit in stride, with the right ball, every single time that Rodgers, we know he can deliver that kind of ball to a guy like Garrett Wilson. I think this guy not only is like offensive rookie of the year type caliber year, I think he goes a step further and maybe offensive player of the year type category season here. So I think this is really interesting going forward. I want to see what both of these guys are able to do, but I'm really excited to see Garrett Wilson's progression.
And just one more point to end on here, Miles. You mentioned Russell Wilson and his struggles with the Denver Broncos. Obviously, Jets fans are familiar with Brett Favre and the issues he had when he came up to the New York Jets. One of the issues that happens when you have a veteran quarterback move on is, especially a guy who's a legendary status like Favre, like Rodgers, they don't have a good ability to connect sometimes with the younger players. There's just an emotional disconnect there. That was an issue with Brett Favre. That was an issue with Russell Wilson with the Denver Broncos, all the stories of Wilson having his own offense, not relating to the guys in the locker room. The fact that Rodgers is coming out and saying this too, I think is another great sign that he's not having that problem. He's fully integrated into the football team, fully integrated into the locker room, and that's a great sign for the Jets, as well as all these other news.